Comics. Indie Comics.
Welcome to ORP, otherwise known as Omen Revelations Podcast. I'm your host, Michael Nunley.
And I'm your co-host, Steve Sellers. On ORP, we like to talk about geek stuff, pop culture, including movies and TV series, as well as comic books and comic characters. But that's not all, is it, Mike?
No, it's not, Steve. We're also writers for Omen Comics and Revelation Comics. So we like to talk about both writing and our comics. So podcast and chill with us. Today we're here for our 6th Indie Comics Creator Spotlight with Alex Dawe from NRG Comics, Empress, and Zener Master of the Mind. Why don't you say hello, Alex?
Hi there. Thanks for having me on. I'm super excited to be here.
Yeah. Nice to have you. So let's just jump right into this. We got some questions for you. I guess the first, I'm wondering, what does NRG stand for? And could you tell us maybe the label's origin story?
Well, it really doesn't stand for anything. It's actually a play on the word energy, so like an energy drink or energy grid. I can't remember where I came up with the idea, but when I first started my comic company publishing, I wanted something snappy and cool to really stand out from the other creators, something that just had a lot of flavor to it, something that just was exciting. And then I thought, I want to give my readers energy when they read my comics. I thought, hey, why don't I call it NRG Comics and play on the word there?
Oh yeah, that totally seems obvious. Now that you say that, I'm looking at it. That totally sounds exactly like what it would be like.
Yeah.
So I mean, how did the label get formed?
Well, I guess you could say I've always wanted to be in comics, but professionally I didn't start back until 2017. That's when we first became official. We had started with an early version of our series, Empress, and we wanted to be official, so with some help from some lawyers I knew, we got the copyrights, we got our name put in, and we became an official company. And we published our first series online through NRG of Empress.
Oh, nice. And how long ago was that?
I remember it. It was the process started back in 2017, and we officially launched in January of 2018.
Wow, that's awesome. We started Omen Comics in 2018, and we met somebody else who started in 2018. I believe it was the Mythoverse people. And now you saying you started in 2018. I wonder if that is some kind of nexus of comic creativity.
Well, those were 2017 and 2018 were definitely some of the better years for comics for me. Like 2017 is what I guess you could say inspired me to get off my butt and start making comics after browsing a whole bunch of ideas. And 2018 was like where I actually first began it. And it's been a long few years since then. I mean, not a long, but I mean, it's been a few years, and I've definitely learned a lot. I've really put it out. We're really excited to get our comics off the ground. But yeah, I can imagine a lot of people, I know personally, got their start in 2018. Some are having really good starts, and some are really still building an audience, but they're really doing good. It seemed like a good year for comics.
Yeah, that it was. So I would classify your titles as like all ages superhero books, but I mean, would you say that's accurate? Is that what you're going for?
Yes, that's definitely what we would go for. I mean, there's going to be some stuff in it that's obviously not for like little kids, like you would find the DC superhero girl stuff for, but it's definitely all ages. We're not mature, like I guess you could say Zenscope or Spawn comics are, but we definitely are inspired by the likes of Kirkman's Invincible or Savage Dragon, and a lot of our animes that go into and mangas go into our comics too. So it definitely is for all ages, but I guess you could say a bit of older ages, like teen and up. So, but it's something we want to introduce all our readers to in some way.
It's interesting that you mention influences and things like Invincible, and I could definitely tell that there was a certain amount of that. Were there any particular superhero characters or stories that made you fall in love with the genre, including those or other ones, or that you drew on to create these characters that maybe you want to talk about?
Well, I've always loved superheroes. I'm just putting that out there. My earliest influence with them was the Power Rangers because I was there in the '90s when they came out,
Mm.
and they've been a big influence in my work ever since. But I think the very first time I've actually had a traditional superhero setting was actually Bruce Timm's Batman the Animated Series. It's always been great example of great storytelling to me, like for all ages and how to do like very like grounded characters, grounded and rounded, that people will love and root for, even if they're bad guys, and that's what really played a big part. As for my characters themselves, I guess with Xener, you could say that Superman was obviously an influence, but there. But let's see. The tough thing with the Xener is that there's not really a whole lot of psychic male characters out there. But I guess one influence was like since he has a lot of mental issues, or he's going to, Legion, like Charles Xavier's son, played a hard part in that because he's like, and a bit of Jean Grey, the Phoenix, because she suffered with backlashes from her powers too. As for Empress, the most obvious one was Wonder Woman, but I think you could say that any female superhero is going to be influenced by her. But then, like another influence was like actually my favorite X-Men character, Storm from the X-Men, because I love that her powers were controlling the weather, and I knew with a nature hero, I wanted that to be one of her powers. And a lot of Swamp Thing saga, both Alan Moore and the New 52 saga, that played a part into the nature building of her mythos. But actually, one character that people are really surprised to learn about that influenced Empress's character is actually Azula from Avatar.
Hmm.
Back when I first conceived the idea from Empress, I was like still on a big heavy Avatar influence, and Azula's always been my character. And around the time, I was noticing a lot of fan art and fan fiction about her getting her own redemption arc, like Zuko did, and I started looking at the character more, and I realized, that's something we could actually do with our iconic superhero. Like you don't see a lot of superheroes starting out as bad people, but then trying to make an effort to turn good. I mean, probably the most obvious example would be Zuko, but I wanted something a little more deep, someone who actually had some badness to him, like Azula. So she's played a part in Empress's character ever since then.
Oh, that's interesting. Steve knows a little bit about bad guys turning good.
Yeah, definitely one of my protagonists does that. Although I was also thinking a little bit of Tony Stark with Empress as well. The whole corporate bad guy, has to change his ways and try to make up for the past bad decisions that he made.
Oh yeah. Tony Stark, especially the first Iron Man movie. When we first started writing Empress, before we gave her a soft reboot, I definitely had the idea in mind of the first Iron Man movie, was because I labeled that as a great example of how to tell a superhero origin, but also do it like a superhero tale that you could read anytime. They really nailed it. That was a great example on Marvel's part.
So the Empress preview leads right into Xener Master of the Mind Zero issue, which tells me we're dealing with a shared universe here. You said that Xener Master of the Mind is getting a #1 issue. Is Empress getting her very own title too? And just how big is this universe going to be?
Well, to answer those questions in orders, Xener is getting an issue 1, and we're working on that now. And so is Empress. That's also just begun production. When we introduced Empress, we took influence from Mike Mignola's methods of introducing Hellboy when he did the 4-pagers in the back of Image Comics or Dark Horse Comics, which we thought was a great idea. But yeah, it is a big shared universe, and we have one more series coming out that we're going to expand our universe through, and it's actually one that I'm personally writing myself, and I guess you could say it's my passion project, like the one I'm most excited to be writing for than anything. It's called Toon Man, the Animated Ace, and I sent you a little preview of that in the mail, and it's about a cartoon character, a failed one, who makes a deal and comes to our universe to find purpose again, but he ends up becoming a superhero instead, using his cartoon abilities to protect people. And it has a lot of influence from Spider-Man and Invincible, as well as One Piece, and it's all about like reclaiming one's purpose and adapting to a fish out of water situation. But it's through those main three heroes that we plan to expand our universe, because one of my biggest inventions when it comes to creating comics has always been to create a superhero universe as big as Marvel or DC. And we have a whole bunch of characters that we're going to introduce through these three alone that we're hopefully will become fan favorites and allow us to expand into a greater universe that kind of would one day rival Marvel and DC. But honestly, we'd be happy if we could get the recognition that Dwayne McDuffie's Milestone did. Just like that level would be incredible. And McDuffie's work is definitely another influence of ours.
That definitely makes sense to me, and I really like McDuffie myself, so I can completely respect that. Now, I noticed that there generally are two different ways of world building in the superhero universe. I mean, one is the world outside your window approach that Stan Lee took for his New York. But I noticed that you took more of the DC Universe approach with your setting, with both of your titles taking place in different fictional cities. So you have Ceres City and Indigo Valley, just kind of as a starting point. Can you talk about the thought process behind that and why you took that approach?
Well, we had thought about the Stan Lee method. The problem is, like, when we're writing these books, my editor and I, we live in two different cities, and the places that most comics are based in, like New York or Chicago or Los Angeles, we don't live there. And like, to write for these, which a lot of writers do, you have to actually live in the cities and be familiar with them. And since we don't know anything about New York or Chicago, we couldn't set our comics there. So, but also what I loved about DC is one thing is like they have what they do when they have fictional cities that are kind of influenced by real cities, that they can play around with them and build them as big as they want, just have them lay out however they want. And that's what I liked about doing with Ceres City and Indigo Valley, is that I could build these cities up however I want to fit the characters, and we could add to them and really help develop them just as much as we were developing the characters themselves. But actually, fun fact, those cities are actually based off two cities on the West Coast, because a lot of our comics are taking place on the West Coast, because I noticed that a lot of comics, be them mainstream or indie, take place on the East Coast. So I thought the West Coast was a very underused place for comics. I mean, Avengers had the West Coast Avengers, but that's beside the point. So, So Indigo Valley is actually modeled in part after Seattle, and Ceres City, Portland, Oregon, albeit a more industrial one. And for Toon Man, we have a place called Vaudeville, which is basically Los Angeles or the capital of California. But a lot of Toon Man's comics would be taking place within the California state itself. But they'll all be fictional cities that we can homage after big cities, but still play with and build up around our characters.
I have to say, I love the vaudeville name, and you can kind of argue that Sacramento pretty much is vaudeville anyway. So yes. That's great. Now, I will say you're setting an interesting tone with your universe and with your ideas. So, like, I noticed that on the surface there are definite Silver Age superhero elements, like with a lot of the bright and shiny costumes and the bombastic dialogue. And I admit I love that stuff, but under the surface, I kind of noticed that there can be a little bit of a darker turn, as with some real twists behind them. Can you decide to talk about how you set the tone and what you're hoping to accomplish with it?
Well, ultimately, when I wanted to do comics, and like my editor helped with this, is that I wanted to also do it almost as a love letter to the classic ones that everyone falls in love with, that you would find within DC or Marvel. Like when you read the classic issues, like that's what everyone starts reading, and that's where a lot of the influence comes from. But as I guess you could say, when the Marvel Cinematic Universe came out, I realized that there was a lot more to be done with a lot more grounded elements to it and some real world issues. Because I mean, superheroes are nice, but unless you treat them like real people, like Marvel does with their problems, like Peter Parker is the shining example of this, they're not going to be relatable. So we had to really give our characters problems. We had to create, and we also wanted to create a sense of realism in our universe to a point where like people could say this could happen in our universe, or if it couldn't, they would be like, oh, I wish that could happen in yours because this would be awesome. And ultimately, it also is like, it all comes down to like stuff we wanted to turn on the heels of classic superhero tropes. A lot of what we do is subverting or covering of like a lot of classic superhero comic book tropes.
That's interesting. It's a cool approach to go with it. But you know, speaking of real people, I'm kind of curious. What can you tell us about the people who actually worked on Empress and maybe the creation process?
Well, so I would create the character, and it's been but the biggest help to me through that has been my editor Webb, who's actually writing the series because I wrote the pre-reboot series, but you know as we began to redefine the characters up to date because we wanted to give our readers the best ideas we could. He expressed interest in wanting to write a complicated character who is struggling to find redemption as a superhero, and ultimately struggling with letting go of their own personalities. And like, oh, okay, you know, he probably would be a better job at this when I could. So I decided to let him write it, and he's been doing good. But we kind of co-write it in a sense that like Stan Lee and Jack Kirby did their comics. So I come with the basic ideas, and he irons them out and it spreads them out to really make them grow. And Webb has been a big help. He's basically one of my best friends. He's helped my writing a lot over the years. I consider myself Stan Lee is that I'm the idea guy, but Webb is a great editor and a great writer. He's studied the craft masterfully, and I have grown because of him. As for the artists themselves, Fernando, we actually found him recently online through Facebook because like our intended artist who we're using for the series wasn't available at the time. But we found Fernando's work. He was well priced. He was well educated. He was well experienced, and we thought, you know, Empress would look great in this style. So we gave him a shot, and he just on the first try, just with the first pages, he really nailed down what we wanted, and he brought it to life. And it's kind of why I consider the artist the true craftsman behind the comic, because you can have the great writing and ideas, but ultimately they're the ones who bring it to life. So we're very thankful for Fernando for meeting him, and he's actually doing some character profile designs for us to promote on social media.
It's really awesome. You say you came up with the ideas. How could you elaborate on that a little bit? Like, did you create the story or the characters, the personality? How much of that went into there?
Well, in the beginning, it was mostly me. Me and Webb met in college, and kind of online through college through DeviantArt. And back up when I was putting my ideas online for people to see, he was giving constructive feedback, which at first, you know, like anything, is not easy to hear, but ultimately it helped. And we went back and forth on ideas, and through him, we were able to build Empress and a lot of my characters up into what they did now. And actually, a lot of lore that you see in the myth and in Xener and Empress, that's a lot of him bringing it to light. I mean, I come up with some good ideas for how the characters can be introduced, like what their plots are, things they'll struggle with, and he fleshes them out more, I guess you could say. I give him the seeds, and he lets them grow.
All right, that makes sense. We did something similar with my characters, White Druid and Michael Nero, and I handed it over to Steve. So I think we have an idea what you're talking about there.
Yeah, it's definitely a collaborative effort, which I think in comics is like really one of the best things you can do when making a comic, because you can try to do it on your own and it's possible, but when you have more ideas and more people to go off of, that's when it starts to flourish. It's like saying it takes a village to raise a kid.
Right. I like the there's wisdom in the multitude of counsel.
Exactly.
So the Empress preview, is that going to be in the first issue of her comic, like in the beginning or something?
Well, for now, we're using that to promote on social media. Like I said, it's like the Mike Mignola Hellboy method that he used to introduce people to comics. But ultimately, once the Toon Man preview is finished, we're going to collect that and the Empress 4-pager and the Xener zero issue and put them all into, like, I guess you could say, like a single anthology issue, which is like a grounded introduction to our universe, and then distributed at cons and online for people to enjoy. So it'll be our first selling item.
Wow.
Yeah, that sounds interesting. Not unlike our Omenverse trade. I mean, it is very much kind of in that vein, I would say. But yeah I totally get that. So getting back to Empress, one thing I found interesting about her is that although she is kind of like the most famous superhero in your universe that you've shown so far, you mentioned Wonder Woman as an influence.
Yeah.
You know, she turns out not to be that likable. And then you talked about the idea that, you know, she's out there redeeming herself, and that tries to make a lot more sense. So she comes across as defensive and a bit arrogant at first, and then she later recognizes this with regret, and you can already see that in those preview pages. I guess the point I'm trying to make is that we see a lot of comics where redemption is basically, okay, I'm just going to join the good guys now, and you know, I might be a jerk for a little bit, but mostly I'm okay, and all is forgiven after that. I don't get that impression from Empress. So I'm guessing that the idea is that her search for redemption is going to be like a day-to-day struggle for her, and that they're going to have consequences. Would that be fair?
Oh yeah, I mean, consequences is a big thing when it comes to our universe. That's one of the sense of realism that we're doing. It's not always going to be happily ever afters, or you know, everything's going to be fixed right away. There's going to be consequences. There's going to be body counts. There's going to be like long roads to doing the right thing and making up. Our heroes are going to make mistakes. They're not always going to win. And with Empress, that's one of the shining examples, because she wasn't a good person to begin with, and people know this. And especially Xenor's another case, because he makes an effort to not only help people but help his villains, because he's a therapist in real life, or studying to be one. But ultimately, his first introduction as a superhero didn't go well, and people are aware that he has some struggles mentally, so they don't necessarily tell him. Ironically, the plan is like Toon Man is actually going to be the more popular hero because he's a cartoon character. People love those, and even though he screws up sometimes, people are still on his side. But ultimately, there are some people who are like, okay, can we really trust a cartoon character to look after us? And there's going to be some black and white, but it's kind of looking for Spider-Man with him. So,
well, Toon Man really looks so wholesome anyway. Like, he's just, you know, that kind of figure, so that makes sense.
Yeah. Like, I mean, he's very much at all ages, like classic cartoons are, but he still has some, like, I guess you could say adult points to him, like, again, like classic cartoons, like Looney Tunes or Animaniacs did at some point. You'll see that he's just as human as everyone else, especially since he's now in the human world and he's adapting to a world that's no longer a cartoon world.
That's interesting. I mean, you mentioned Looney Tunes. I got to ask, are we going to get a little fourth wall action in this?
Oh yes, very much. It's not going to be
Nice.
like, it's not going to be over heavily done. Like, I've struggled with that in the past, but there's going to be some fourth wallness, like, especially within his first issue. We have some of that played to not only within how he's introduced and how it relates to his world and our human world, but also within the comic himself. It's like we have this plan for, like, he's realized that he wakes up, he's in the cartoon world, he tries to run away, and he bumps right into the panel. It's like, okay, I'm in a human world in a comic book format.
Nice. So I got a question about the Xener Master of the Mind comic. Now on the cover there are 3 names listed, and I want to make sure I'm pronouncing. Is it Blaine?
Blaine, yeah, it's a hard to pronounce, but that's Webb. That's his last name.
Okay, and then there's your last name, and then there's Manyanita.
Yeah, that his first name is Juan, and he's our artist for Xener. He's from the Philippines. We also met him on Line Through DeviantArt. And I just want to put this out there: if there are any people looking to start a comic and looking for an artist, you will find tons of great artists on DeviantArt who are looking for their start, looking to develop, and they will have good deals. But we met Juan actually back in our first Empress series. Our original artist got a chance to do some other stuff, so we let him do it, and we needed a new one. And we found Juan, brought him on. People loved his style, and we wanted to keep him on for Xener because we felt his style worked perfectly for that classic, Superman struggling mythos that we wanted. And I just want to put out there that Juan's art is incredible. Even his sketch work is just spot on. It's like Steven Sejenic's sketch work, like the creator of Sunstone and Mercy. And then, like, his black and whites are phenomenal. I actually want to do like a crime thriller superhero series with Juan that's like all black and white, kind of like Sin City. But like, it's just, his artwork is incredible. I mean, it's pretty much standard superhero, but but he's well priced, he's well talented, he has experience, he's a great artist.
And was the creation process with Xener Master of the Mind the same as it was on Empress?
I guess Xener was a character that didn't come to me until like after I graduated college, or like towards the end of college. At the time, I admit I was struggling. A lot of my early influence with my characters came from the big names like DC or Marvel, and admittedly, I had tried to fill some archetypes, which I know now is not the way to do your own comic. But so, and Xehanort was, I was struggling to make a big iconic superhero to fill Superman's role, but then I had this idea for a psychic superhero, like had a lot of superpowers but struggles. And when we got together with Webb and Juan, we started bringing him to life. And Webb had like all these ideas for like what Xehanort would struggle with, and a lot of my initial ideas went through a filter system, especially with his villains, and how to connect it to Xehanort and a bigger goal. And some of our ideas since then have just really stuck, and it's planned to go forward with them through Xehanort's comic and the rest of our series too.
Yeah, it seems like with Xehanort, you're really trying to show the contrast between the superhero fantasy that we kind of see early in the issue, and then the reality of just how dangerous these superhero fights are to ordinary people. And you were talking a little bit like, not how everybody doesn't always win or turn out well for the heroes all the time. And we do kind of see a little bit of that here. But I guess I was trying to say, was this something you were trying to say about superhero fights in general, or was that just setting up the story that you're trying to tell with Xehanort?
No, it's something we wanted to set up with superhero fights in general. I mean, that was more of Webb's thinking than mine because he wrote the issue. But a lot of that influence also came from where I stood, the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Because I've always you notice that some of their more successful villains have been their lesser known, lesser powerful ones. I think the shining example of this is Vulture from Homecoming, Spider-Man Homecoming.
Mm-hmm.
He doesn't seem like he could do much damage in a comic book, but when you put him in a live setting, you see this on Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. and in Luke Cage, Daredevil, Jessica Jones. You see all these minor level villains who actually, if you put them in a real life setting, aren't jokes. They're actually very dangerous people who are unhinged and can do a lot of damage and without even trying. And we wanted to capture that. It was like, okay, if these low-level guys could do damage in a real-life setting, just imagine what this monster could do, or someone with Xehanort's power could do in the wrong hands. And we wanted to really and that's one of the things that went hand in hand with our consequences of superhero battles.
I think you did that well. That scene with that guy just laying there in a pool of his own blood is pretty impactful.
Yeah. Shout out to Webb for that one. So
right. So Toon Man is an interesting concept. I like the idea that he basically gets more powerful and his antics more extravagant based on the size of his audience. That makes for some really fun fights, like the one in the preview. But needing an audience is also one heck of an Achilles heel for a character. Can you talk about that aspect of Toon Man without spoiling anything?
Well, yeah. So the idea for that came from my own experience with watching cartoons and movies, be them animated or otherwise. I realized that the jokes or the scenes are more powerful or more funny when there's a large number of people laughing at them or crying at them or cheering for them. You definitely feel it more than when you're alone. And I'm really and I thought, okay, so maybe that's part of what makes animation so beloved. The more people who watch it, the more powerful it is. It kind of also has to do with ratings for a cartoon show on TV or in a movie. The more people who watch it, the more it's going to keep going. And the thing about it is, early on, I realized, cartoons, even the more simple ones, are pretty powerful. To some degree, they have some sort of healing, or they don't die, or they can do pretty much anything. I mean, Jim Carrey's The Mask is the big example of this one, or Freakazoid, Looney Tunes, and Animaniacs. So I had to figure out a way to make Toon Man less powerful, but still one of the most powerful person in my universe. And I thought, okay, since he's a cartoon character and his purpose is, to bring joy to others, it's kind of why people like him. They watch him. So maybe that's something that has to be done. Maybe he requires at least a third person there to his powers to be fully adapt. And the bigger the audience, the more powerful he is. But that also puts a backlash on him, because he can't just have people watching him all the time. I mean, this is dangerous situations. People could get hurt, and he doesn't want them to get hurt. He's very opposed to death, and that's something I plan to explore in my comics. And so he's caught in this trap. Like, okay, do I sacrifice all my power just so people can be safe, or do I put them in danger just so I can beat the bad guys quicker?
And it also kind of puts him in trouble if he has to do anything that might be unpopular.
Exactly. That is like that's what that has to go with the consequences of our universe. There's not a lot of our planned heroes like Empress and Xena are going to have questionable backgrounds or like lives before they became who they are, and a lot of them are seeking redemption. The whole morality in our universe is very shades of gray. It's not all black and white. And a lot of our planned heroes are questionable in their past, but they struggle to do the right thing, or like basically they have goals to protect people, but their methods aren't always good. And when people see their methods, they're like, okay, can we really trust these people to protect us? I mean, look what they were doing before, and now look what they're doing now. I mean, have they really changed?
Mm-hmm.
So it's like it captures that realism. Like if a superhero was in a real life, they're like any other public figure. They're going to make mistakes, and a lot of people, especially in a digital age, are going to react to that almost in a bad way, and it's going to catch on.
Yeah, I think that definitely makes sense. Now, I know you've talked a bit about the process already, so I'm just going to kind of change what I had in mind a little bit. So a lot of your influences, include the Looney Tunes, which, I mean, that's definitely there. I also reminded a lot of Plastic Man. He definitely seems to have like that kind of an approach, even if the source of his power and his approach is different. And also I noticed that the style of humor is not unlike that as well. So I'm kind of curious, what is your process as far as handling comedy visually?
Visually, I think definitely when it comes to cartoons, a lot of their humor is visual. I mean, I gotta have the slapstick in there. That's the classic part of it. But also, I have to look deeper in that. I have to, analyze. I have to set up, punchlines. I have to bring out their personality. So the things they're doing are not just funny because they're being physical about it. It's because like part of their personality. So it goes back to not just presenting the characters as superheroes or cartoons. I have to present them human as everyone else.
Yeah.
And that comes into mind like a quote I heard from the director of like movies such as This Is 40, Knocked Up, and the 40-year-old version. I remember the director said, and this always stuck with me, the key to every comedy is behind all the jokes, when you strip them away, there's a serious story to tell. And that has stuck with me. So I always build up the story first. I plot out like the good hero's journey, and then I add the jokes. And then when I strip them away, there's still going to be a great story there.
Yeah, I've always had kind of a similar view. I mean, I think it's always, for me, it's always been, if you can't be funny, be interesting. Yeah. So I think it's kind of like the same basic thing, have a story there, so that if the comedy doesn't land, you have the net. So I completely get that. Yeah. Was there a reason you wanted to explore a more comedic character after Empress and Xena?
Well, I guess you could say I've always loved comedy. That's one of my favorite genres. I love to laugh. I love like joyous things. I'm a kind of guy who loves for a happy ending. And, a lot of my writing and my ideas have always been a little more lighthearted, like wholesome. Well, I guess maybe not wholesome, but just a lot of my ideas that I really want to write are ideas that you would share with a family or that everyone would love. So I guess comedy has always been one of that aspects. But actually, I also really want to write some gritty stuff. I mentioned that I want to do a crime thriller, and a fact that surprises people is that I love noir crime fiction, like the classic pulp stuff or like modern versions of it. I just love the grittiness of it, how every like character is like very like shades of gray, not black and white, but they're very flawed, and it's just a cool atmosphere. And I guess you could say that's probably also influenced our universe too, is like how everyone's not perfect in our universe.
I'm really glad that you brought up the noir thing, because it seemed like that was like the one piece of the puzzle that I hadn't seen in any of your characters, so I can't wait to see that.
Yeah. Like we actually want to introduce a crime there. We have a great idea for like a detective hero in our universe who's a tribute to the classic pulp heroes like the Shadow and the Spirit, but set in a modern day setting. It's all just a matter of making sure we can fund the comic. I mean, let's face it. I mean, we have a lot of ideas, but unless we are able to pay for the comic to get done, these things don't get done.
Absolutely.
Got to work within our we got to work within our budget, you know.
Yeah, I could completely understand that. I mean, you got to pay the bills and keep the lights on. So yeah,
it's all about prioritizing, and like, if you can do that, you can make your dreams come true.
Yeah. And speaking of which, here's your chance to talk about anything we haven't mentioned yet. Are there any plans to expand the universe beyond what you've talked about, or any upcoming projects outside of those books or that universe that you want our listeners to know about?
Well, we have a lot of, like I said, we have a lot of heroes planned for our universe that mostly going to be introduced through Xener, Empress, and Toon Man. A lot of them are like ideas I've had for a while, and some of them are actually going to be ideas that Webb had for his own comic ambitions that he wasn't doing much, so we decided to roll them over into our universe. So you'll see them making a comeback into our universe as a whole. So it's kind of a melting pot of ideas. We have plans for teams of heroes. We have plans for like big iconic bad guys and lores that you don't normally see done in comics. With our comics, we want to take a chance. We want to try new things. Like everything that DC and Marvel is too afraid to do, we want to do it. Ultimately, from our comics, they're going to get good storytelling. They're going to get characters that they're going to love, root for, and even if they're the villains. And another thing that we're going to have for our universe that I'm putting this out there because I know people want this is canon. You know, we're going to have an actual set of limits of like things. We're not going to continuously bring back people from the dead. We're going to have like events that are going to be set in stone and they're not going to change no matter how much we want to. And we're not going to have like some big climactic like universe shaking event like every 3 months. Like those are going to be spaced out like years in advance. Or like basically like we want to do comics right by our audience because we're comic readers too, and we've heard and we know what people want from their comics today that they're not getting from the big ones, and we want to give them that because we know that's what we would want too.
Right on, right on. So that noir book you're talking about, is that going to be in its own title, or is that going to be like a little side story, or? That's
going to be in our universe as well, and we're actually hoping for this one that for this title, which I want to write, is actually going to open up to a very more grounded part of our universe that deals a lot with the street level vigilantes and how there are many archetypes and different types of street vigilantes you'll see in comic books, and we're bringing them all together. But the main character, the main thing within her own series that we introduced for it, is that it's very noir, like a tribute to noir, that no one is very black and white. It's all shades of gray. People are going to be as bad as they're going to be good. They'll have limits, but they'll have lines they'll cross. And it's going to be a more grounded part of our universe in that it'd be like, you know, kind of Batman or Spider-Man. Is like all the stakes are like city level, but from there you can raise them and lower them as long as the storytelling is good.
Mm-hmm. What is your next big project? What should people be on the lookout for right now?
Well, ultimately they should be on the lookout for Xener issue 1, Empress issue 1, and of course Toon Man issue 1. And
do you know when those are coming out? Do you have a schedule in mind?
We're hoping to get the we're halfway done through the issue 1 of Xener. That should be released by the end of the year. Hopefully Empress will be the same. And once we nail down an artist for Toon Man, hopefully that will be done by the end of the year too. But we will be keeping people up to date on our comics because we like to show them the works in progress as they come, and we want to show them we are working on them. We're not just saying they're coming, but not giving them anything in return. Because these pages that we work on, the work in progress, they're great for audienceship. Like people love seeing these get done.
Totally. That's a great way to go about it. We do something similar at Omen and Revelation. Mm-hmm. But that actually about wraps up our interview, Alex. We appreciate you coming on the show and talking about your comics and your label. But why don't you tell our listeners where they can find you on social media and where they can pick up your comics at?
Awesome. Okay, so our comics will soon be available on Comixology and on Indie Planet. We're getting the process of setting them up. You can find our main website is on DeviantArt. We're going to have a Patreon coming up soon with a lot of Patreon exclusive rewards that you don't want to miss. This is going to be stuff that you're not going to find anywhere else. Not on but we're on Twitter, we're on Facebook. We just cracked 1.8K followers on Facebook. We have an Instagram. We have a YouTube channel where we're going to put on more content. We're working on our own website for our own company. So you can find us everywhere if you just type in NRG Comics.
That's awesome, man. That's really cool. We support indie comics and the indie comics community, but we'd like to take this time to thank our patrons whose support makes this podcast possible.
Thank you so much for your patronage, everyone. I've always said that the way we all exceed in this business is supporting each other. Like hashtag indie support.
Amen. I hope you've had fun hanging out with us today on ORP. I know that Steve and I have had fun making this episode. If you've had fun too, we invite you to share this episode and help us get the word out.
For our Spotify listeners, we ask you to please rate our show as well. That can really help to grow our audience. But to all our listeners everywhere, we want to say thank you for listening, and we'll see you in 2 weeks.